I mean, it's never very far from the surface, the sleaze in the political business, is it? I mean, everybody kind of pretends it doesn't go on. Everybody kind of turns a blind eye, and every now and again, you get something like this, where it all rises to the surface, and everybody goes, I'm shocked to see that this is going on.
Yes, well, it's a bit rich for Labour to sort of try and portray this as something that is unique to the Conservative Party. If you think back to the expenses scandal, the people who actually had abused the allowances to such an extent and so dishonesty that they actually ended up in prison were Labour MPs, and that they need to be reminded of that. But yes. I think we need to get away from this sort of trivial bickering and look at the situation. I mean, I am one of those who thinks that the procedures in the House of Commons are very badly flawed. Refusal to examine witnesses is not justice. The absence of any right of appeal is not justice. In this case, it is said that the Commissioner had actually made her mind up, or almost made it up even before she started on the case. That's not justice. So I think there was a case, logically, and if you believe in impartial justice, as I do, and believe it's essential for democracy, then there was a case to be made to say this needs to be looked at. Now, anybody with an iota of common sense could have worked out that you don't do that with a Tory-dominated committee of MPs. You do that by inviting an outsider with solid legal experience, obviously a retired High Court judge, somebody of that standing. You invite that person to look at the procedures. The review is not commissioned by the government, but by the Speaker. And at the end, what you accept and don't accept must be decided on the basis of a free vote. And if he had done all of that, then it would have been a very different outcome. And it didn't help that Owen Paterson, who I think didn't necessarily have fair procedures, whether he was innocent or guilty, either way, I think Owen Paterson, to boast that he would do exactly the same thing again, instead of taking a rather different line and saying, yes, there were very serious health issues. I'm not sorry I brought those to the attention of the ministers, but maybe I didn't do it in the best way. Maybe I should be more transparent. Maybe I should have consulted the Commissioner for Standards beforehand rather than had a fight with her afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that would have made a huge difference. In other words, what I think is the issue really here is the bungled handling of it all.
Well, yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, most of the people that I've spoken to in Parliament would suggest that, there's not much doubt that Owen Paterson did breach the rules, right? But as you say, that's not really the main point at issue here. The main point at issue is that the government, and Boris Johnson in particular, really mangled the whole thing and should have either stuck with one side or the other instead of flip-flopping about and suddenly realising, oh my God, we better reverse ourselves, because it's now being said by many people in the Conservative Party that Boris is no longer kind of in charge and that he can't seem to make a decision and stick to it.
Well, I mean, I think you're entitled to ask if kids took this series of decisions, because it was all so unnecessary. It could have been handled with great tact and with impartiality, instead of which it was handled in a way that could be presented as standing up for one's own. And that is never a good look when you're looking at justice, you're looking at alleged corruption, you're looking at the standards that we all want Parliament to uphold. It's never a good look to be seen as protecting one's own. You need to stand aside, and you can say the procedures are flawed. But as I say, what you then get is a totally independent examination.
Yes, but I think the other problem is if, say, for example, Boris had done what you suggested, which was to set up an independent inquiry, have a proper series of hearings so that you could work out whether or not he'd done the right thing, I think people in general would look at that situation and say, why the hell are these MPs such hypocrites? Why are they wasting so much public money doing yet another inquiry into something which they could have decided literally in 1 second and said, you breached the conditions, this is the suspension, this is the penalty, take your medicine, we'll see you in a couple of months. I mean, that would be the way I think the public would like it to be done.
Because I think the issue was not so much just what Owen Paterson had done and whether he had breached the rules, or whether the exception that is built into the rules was applicable in his case. That really wasn't the issue that should have been concerning MPs. The big issue It's the whole procedure of MPs sitting in judgment on themselves and the procedures which they use. The absence of an appellate function is unique. It doesn't happen anywhere else.
No, exactly right. So, I mean, as far as today's proceedings are concerned, there's meant to be some kind of special session of Parliament, which we were told wasn't going to happen, now is happening at 2:30. Some people are suggesting Boris Johnson might not turn up. I'm assuming that's not going to be the case and that he will turn up, because it would be a massive error again if he didn't, wouldn't it?
Well, it'll be a huge error of judgment if he doesn't turn up. It will look scornful, it will look dismissive, it will look as if he doesn't care about public concern. So, yes, I really do hope he turns up. But I think all this needs calming down. And the way this is calmed down is the Speaker is the one who commissions the review. The Speaker is the one who appoints the High Court judge, not the government. That is the way to start getting out of this now, is to take things out of the hands of any one party, regardless of whether that party is in government or not, and just have it administered completely externally. And then, of course, MPs have got to take the decision on whether or not the recommendation should be implemented. But they must do that on the basis of a free vote, not a whipped one.
Yeah, absolutely right. So you think that the situation, the standard situation at the moment is sort of hold below the waterline and can't continue as it is?
I do. And I mean, I think the procedure's been forward for a very, very long time. And now we're having, well, MPs are now having to confront that. Should have been confronted a long time ago in less emotional and fraught situations and less controversial situations. That's when it should have been confronted.
Yes.
I mean, I myself sat on the Standards Committee and I resigned from it because so farcical were the procedures that when Neil Hamilton was accused, he addressed us for over 2 hours. I do mean over 2 hours. And we weren't allowed to ask a single question. Not a single question. Now, what sort of justice is that? Whole thing, balmy. It's needed revision for a very long time.
Yes, I think so. What did you make of John Major's intervention over the weekend? Because, of course, a lot of people were saying he's not exactly the right guy to be talking about sleaze in the Tory party, given what happened under his Back to Basics campaign. But you were a minister under John Major's government. What do you think he's up to?
Well, first of all, the Back to Basics campaign was never, ever about sleaze. That was the way the press and the media, and if I may be so bold,
no, but it became about sleaze, though, Anne, because a lot of the government ministers got themselves embroiled in some rather unusual situations.
Yeah, okay, but let me finish what I was saying, because that's only fair and just, so I can finish what I'm saying.
Of course you can.
When Back to Basics was introduced by John Major, it was not about sleaze. It was back to basics in education, the 3 R's, back to basics in health, nurses actually nursing instead of doing degrees, etc., etc. That's how it was conceived. It very quickly, I mean very, very quickly, was made synonymous with a moral campaign, which then justified going back donkey's years into, what obscure backbenchers might have done donkey's years ago. That was a dying government at the end of 4 consecutive terms in office. This is not. Conservatives have a huge majority. They've got a very, very popular, up till now, Prime Minister. This is a different situation. John Major is still entitled to comment.
Oh, he is. But does he speak for the Tory party as a whole, is what I suppose my question is.
I don't think anybody speaks for the Tory party as a whole on this one. I think what you've got to simply say on this one is get it out of the hands of the Tory party and into the hands of the Speaker and a High Court judge, and let them do the deciding, and then for heaven's sake let the Commons decide on a free vote. Get it out of party politics. Yes,
but the bigger question, Anne, is not simply about Owen Paterson or about the Standards Committee. The bigger question is now a question of judgment. And I know that the fans of this particular fire are being flamed by Sir Keir Starmer, first of all calling for Boris Johnson to resign, talking about him running, a sort of a terribly dirty stable, in his own words. And in the end, the questions that are being asked within the Tory party are about Boris Johnson. They're not really about sleaze. They're not really about Owen Paterson. They're about Boris and whether or not he is any longer the man to run the party and the government.
Well, that's what it's coming down to. Prime Ministers have ridden out much bigger storms than this one. And I think he will be able to ride it out, but only if he takes the right attitude towards it. This is not one where you can afford to be dismissive. And I just hope that he is consulting at the moment
Well, I think
Older, wiser heads. I really hope so.
yes, but I'm not sure where those older, wiser heads are, because it seems to me that Downing Street has apparently become a bit of a cult of personality. The people who work there appear to be kind of nominated and almost knighted and tapped on the shoulder by Mrs. Johnson, who seems to have surrounded herself with a lot of her former friends and colleagues from Conservative Central Office. You know, you don't get a sense that there's a sort of what you might call a even a star chamber of wise old heads in there.
No, there isn't. I mean, there's no grey eminence.
No.
So just advising them. And yet there are such people around, you know. I mean, there are former prime ministers like William Hague. There are a few very serious people in the Lords with long experience of the political situation, long experience of it. They are the ones now that Boris should be talking to, not the kids in Downing Street.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Boris is quite pig-headed about these matters, it seems to me, and he doesn't like to ask for whatever advice he might not like to hear, if you like. You know, he seems to be surrounded by people whose advice he likes to hear, because it's always about him, and it's always about what a great job he's doing and how far and away ahead he is from Labour. But in the most recent polls, he's not anymore.
No. The fact is, one of the most common failings of a politician is that you appoint people because you like what they say and you want to hear what they say.
Yeah.
And that is why I always made a habit when I was a minister of trying to have on my team somebody who was from the other wing of the party,
Yeah.
a left winger, in other words, so that we had a dissident voice, so that we had a voice which would encourage us to consider what we might not have otherwise considered.
Yes.
Boris should now do that. He needs somebody who is not a great Boris fan to help him.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. But there is surely room for a better version of the House of Lords, isn't there?
Yes, and the House of Lords is indeed far too big, completely bloated, and the quality is nothing like what it used to be. So I think the first thing must be to reduce the size of the Lords. Now, you may say, how do you do that? Sometimes it's proposed that you do it on the basis of an age limit, but actually there are Lords in their 80s who do a very good job.
Yeah.
Others propose a length of service limit. But actually, if you come into the Lords and you serve faithfully for 25 years and you're very competent at it, that's a reason to go on. So I would prefer an activity limit. I would prefer to take a date in the past so that people just can't rush to get it all done. Take a date in the past, say, right, if by that date you haven't made X speeches, asked Y questions, served on P committees, done Q whatever, in such a way that you test how active they are, then those are the people that you prune. Unless, of course, they've been seriously ill, but there's a good reason. There is also a very small cadre of people in the Lords. We can think of Robert Winston, we can think of Andrew Lloyd Webber, we can think of people like that from both the present and the past who are there because of significant outside achievements. And you don't expect them to be day-to-day politicians. You want their voices when there's something big that they can comment on. But that small cadre is nothing like the whole of the Lords, and it's the rest of the Lords that I think we need to print on an activity basis.
And the problem as well, it seems to me, Anne, is that there's so many people going into it as well, because every time, I mean, surely there must now be a limit on how many people can be elevated to the House of Lords. And I know that you'll probably say, well, many people who are not there yet probably should be there and probably should be able to be nominated, right? However, at the end of the day, you can't just keep putting more and more people into something and not expect it to grow.
Well, as I said, the first and most urgent thing is to reduce the size, and then you can put more people in. Reduce the size. And if you do that and you get rid of the deadwood, the people who claim they're expensive but actually contribute precious little, you get rid of the deadwood, you then can appoint the graver, more serious people to it, because you've got the room there. But you're quite right, at the moment, you're running out of room. In fact, we will run out of room, I would say.